I've been thinking over the last few weeks about how to make the podcasts more interesting. So hopefully you are finding them interesting. And I'm trying to mix the topics a little bit. So if you've been listening for a while, you'll know that some of the topics are kind of how to do different aspects of photography or the things not to do in some cases. There's also where to do it. So I've spoken about places I've been to and also what you can do locally, just as a way of preparation for going on some of these big trips, which you might not have the chance to do again. I've, excuse me, I have also been doing interviews. So the aim is that I have one a month where I'm just chatting to somebody, usually other photographers, but also people who are involved in research or conservation or anything that's relevant to the kind of adventure, wildlife, travel sort of photography areas that I cover in the podcast. And I've also recently just started a new series where I focus on one particular animal and try and give you a bit of a background about it. So hopefully that will make it a bit more interesting. And another idea I had was to just talk about my favorite places. So places I've been that I've really loved and would love to go back to again. Sometimes on some of them I have been back more than once. Others, I may not get the chance again. But I thought I'd just talk about locations because you might be thinking about places you'd like to go, but you're perhaps not sure, or, they look kind of the same on a map. What differentiates one place from another? If you're looking at certain locations, that might be Africa or somewhere else. So in this podcast, I thought I'd talk about Victoria Falls. And Victoria Falls is one of those places that I've wanted to go for a long time. I just kind of had a vision of it being in Central Africa, being very green, very lush, lots of animals. And to some extent, that's true. And I went to Victoria Falls at the beginning of 2020, so just before the COVID pandemic really kicked in. It was kind of happening at the time, and but not the full-blown lockdowns and everything else. That was still to come when I was there. And I went because I wanted to do a project at Victoria Falls, and there was a volunteer project with wildlife in the Zimbabwe side, actually near the town of Victoria Falls. And if you've spoken or if you've listened to my podcast before, you'll know that I'm a very big advocate for doing volunteering projects rather than doing the more usual tourist trips. And there are a number of reasons for that, which I won't go into in this podcast because I've spoken about those reasons several times before. So the great thing about Zimbabwe for me in Victoria Falls is not only the location and the animals, but also you're very close to other countries. So just to, I guess, locate it a bit more, Victoria Falls is sort of more or less in the middle of Africa, being very broad about it. And it's on the Zambezi River, which is one of the major rivers in Africa. And it's one of those names, certain names kind of spark an image for me, and I get quite excited. And the Zambezi is one of those. So it's one of the major rivers in Africa. And of course, at one point it hits the falls, and they're known as the Victoria Falls. And they are on the border between Zimbabwe, so they're in the northwest corner of Zimbabwe, and Zambia. So Zambia's on the other side. So you can actually walk across the bridge. There's a railway bridge over the falls. And if you walk from Zimbabwe, you come to Zambia. And it's known as the Zim-Zam border locally, but that's pretty much where it is. And close to that part of Zimbabwe, you also are on the border with Botswana, so you've got access to the Chobe River, which is another one of these amazing wildlife locations. And you're also quite close to Namibia, because if you look at Namibia, in the top in the northeast of Namibia, there's this finger that kind of runs out to the east, and that comes very close to the border with Zimbabwe. So it's kind of nicely located in terms of other places you can go to if you are traveling around. It's also, if you don't know much about the history of Zimbabwe, and and there's no reason perhaps why you should. The bit that kind of grabbed me was that that area back in the Iron Age was occupied by the Bantu people. So you may have heard of Bantu people. And they created a state, I guess, called Great Zimbabwe. And it was a major trading area back in those times and into what would in Europe we'd refer to as the early Middle Ages. So there's been civilization there, and quite an impressive civilization there for a long time. And the Bantu people have become the Shona people, and the Shona people today occupy they account for around 80% of the population. Shona is one of the two official languages, with the other being English, that's spoken in Zimbabwe. There are other local, I think there's a total of 16 languages that are recognized in Zimbabwe, but those are the two that dominate. And the Shona people have made up the leadership of the country since it became Zimbabwe, since there was a war. Previously it was known as Rhodesia. So in the 60s when I was growing up, the country was actually known as Rhodesia. It was again one of these countries that was run by the white minority. So kind of similar in some ways to South Africa, which is a better known sort of recent history of the last century or so. And Zimbabwe had a similar story. So it was about the indigenous people really taking control of the country from the white minority, and that white minority came from colonial days. So that story. The downside to that was that Robert Mugabe, who was president since 1980, when Zimbabwe became Zimbabwe, just is one of these people who got too much power, got worse and worse, and essentially trashed the economy. There were lots of human rights violations. They were, as a country, vilified, but it was primarily Mugabe and his people vilified for human rights violations. They were pushed out of the British Commonwealth for that. So it's not been a happy story, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And tourism has also not really been great. I mean, it peaked in around 2017, 2018. And I think it accounted for about $1.1 million. So you can use dollars in Zimbabwe as well as local currency, and also the rand, South African rand. Zambia to the north has actually fared a lot better with the tourism, because obviously Victoria Falls is one of those locations that's very well known internationally. So it would be a draw for people who just want to see them. And that's a big draw. But it tends to be the Zambian part of the equation, the Zambian side, that has fared better than Zimbabwe. And when I was there in 2020, it was definitely evident that the local people were struggling. In the town of Victoria Falls, which is the town on the Zimbabwe side of the border, if you go to Zambia, you've got the town of Livingstone. So they're the two towns close to Victoria Falls, sort of on either side of the falls. The people in the town of Victoria Falls were definitely struggling. You get a lot of people really trying hard to sell you stuff, and it's very difficult because as a tourist, there's so much you can do, so much you can buy, so much stuff you can carry away with you, and it's very difficult to see people struggling. And I can only imagine what it's like post-COVID, because I think COVID would have had a very damaging impact on that area. In terms of administrative regions, the falls are actually Matabeleland North. So if you've heard of Matabeleland, that's over on the west of the country. So where Victoria Falls is on the northern part. So Matabeleland North, and there's Matabeleland South below it. And then in terms of animals, you've got the most amazing animals you can see. And in fact, the town of Victoria Falls is on a migration path, if you like. So before the town, going back 100 years or so, there wasn't much there. And this was just where the animals would migrate. Most animals migrate at different parts of the year because of the change in season, the availability of food, the availability of water, all those kind of things. So one of the paths is right through what is now the town of Victoria Falls. And as that's gradually built up, it's created, I'm not aware of massive conflict, but it's definitely there. So it's not unusual to see an elephant walking up the middle of the town of Victoria Falls, and that the central part is actually quite nicely developed, if you like, from a Western point of view. So you've got a really good supermarket. There's great shops and things that you can buy stuff. There's also other shops for local people, so artists, sculptures in wood, that kind of thing. So you can buy local art as well as pretty much go to a regular Western supermarket in the centre of that part of the town. There are a number of hotels. They cater. You can go from backpackers places through to really plush hotels. There's lots of tourism activities, or there were at least. So you could do the helicopter ride over the falls. So to get, I think it's 20 minutes or so, something like that. And you fly over the falls. You can see them. There's a really nice park at the falls that you can walk around on the Zimbabwe side. I haven't been to the Zambian side, so I can't comment on it. But, great place to go and see the falls. And you can also do bungee jumps off into the canyon that's formed by the Zambezi River. So you can do all that kind of stuff. You can even, I don't know if it's still there, but the time I was there, you could cage dive with crocodiles in Victoria Falls. That was another thing in the town. So I guess from what are you going to do if you go there kind of view, the point of view, there's a lot you can do. And also you're within easily a sort of long day trip to go into Botswana and go to the Chobe and go on the Chobe River, which is an amazing place if you want to see hippos and crocodiles and all those sorts of animals. Things like elephants as well, they migrate around. So depending on what's going on, if there's not so much rain about, if it's a drier part of the year, you're more likely to find things like elephants around the river because the other water sources aren't giving them what they need. I went through Botswana to get to Vic Falls, and it had been raining a lot, so it was very lush, very green, but it also meant that it was more difficult to find wildlife. So I did go on a couple of little trips to waterholes and things like that to try and find elephants. Couldn't find any. And also when I did a trip on the river, on the Chobe River, where I got some great photographs of crocodiles and hippos. But there was an area where we actually stopped to get some breakfast, and there were some crocodiles just sat on the bank near us, completely ignoring us. There was an area there where you would normally expect to see elephants as well, but there were no elephants there because they were off, getting what they needed elsewhere. And in fact, we saw elephants on the main road. We were next to the main road, and they were just coming out of the trees. So if you go during a part of the year where it's drier, you're more likely to find the kind of animals that you probably want to see nearer the rivers because there's the water sources are more limited, so that tends to drive the animals. So coming back to Victoria Falls, I didn't see any elephants in the falls when I was there because it had been quite wet, but there were baboon walking down the high street. There were warthogs. The baboons you've got to watch because when you come out of the supermarket, a lot of these animals are actually pretty smart, and they realise where they can get food without too much effort. So if you've got your food and it's not in a bag, and ideally it should be in a backpack, they will quite often just run up and grab something from you and then off you go. So you won't see that again. So they have become quite wise about living with people and how to get food quite easily. You'll also see them knocking over rubbish bins and kind of going through the rubbish to see what's there. I think there was, I can't remember if it was at McDonald's, but I think it was a fast food place. I didn't eat there, but I think there was one in town, at least one. And the baboons will go through the rubbish for all of that. So again, with the animals, I don't approach them. I let them do their thing. and generally they will leave you alone if you haven't got any food they want. So it was a bit strange though, walking up a road with baboons walking past me going the other way, just like they were other inhabitants of the town, which I guess they were. So in terms of animals you're going to see, you are close to some national parks. So there's the Zambezi National Park is the big one. And there's also Victoria Falls National Park. So with those parks, you generally need to get guides to go in there, or you'll need to book. Generally, access to parks is controlled. If you're volunteering, which I did on a private reserve, again, very close to Victoria Falls, that was, and I was with the Nakavango Conservation Program, then we were seeing all sorts of animals. So elephants, lions, zebra, and then the smaller animals, the impala, chameleons. We saw those, puff adders. So, you kind of get access to the full range of animals pretty much. Giraffe is another one, but without the kind of crush that you can get in national parks. So a lot of times the guides in the national parks, they're trying to give their tourists the best experience, but in doing so they tend to harass the animals, which is something I'm not keen about. So that probably sums up what I primarily wanted to talk about with Victoria Falls. So quite a short podcast, this one, but it's definitely worth a look. And you are in an amazing part of Africa, and if it's safe, you can get down to Harare, which is the capital of Zimbabwe, and you can see the remains of this older civilization. So a lot of Western people tend to think of Africa as being pretty uncivilized and being very, very tribal and no real kind of marks of civilization, for one of the better expression. Then obviously there's Egypt to the north, has a very ancient civilization, but throughout Africa there were other places that have been half forgotten, at least by people in the West, that were very cultured and at the time may have been more advanced than what was going on in Europe and elsewhere. So very interesting country, but when I was there it was definitely you had to be careful, and I guess that's probably still true. So as with all of these things, if you're going to go somewhere, have a look at what your embassy's warnings are, if there are any, about that particular country. I tend to look at the Australian government and the UK government websites. Those I find are very good for just personal risk and whether it's a safe time to go or not a safe time to go. And obviously you need to, as with any travel, just take care while you're there and don't leave yourself exposed or make yourself vulnerable to people who might want to rob you, and obviously you don't want that experience. One thing I will say, one thing you can do, we were getting harassed by people selling stuff, and as I've said, it's very difficult because you want to help people, or I at least want to help people. I think most people, when they go to these places, do want to help the people who are struggling, finding it hard. But they're also a nuisance because there's so much you can do, and they keep just hassling you. So one of the things to do is just to take a photograph of them. That would generally get rid of them and offer to show it to the police. I never actually did that, but it does stop them. And the reason I say that is they can become a real nuisance. And I don't like to do that kind of thing. But, after a while, you do get a bit fed up with it and you just want to be left alone to do what you need to do and then get going. So that's, I guess, a tip for you. Generally people won't attack tourists unless they think they're going to get away with it. If you're on your own and you're somewhere out of where there's lots of other people. So this is where it comes down just to a bit of awareness and common sense about where you go. So I think that really covers what I was going to talk about Victoria Falls. It is an amazing place to go. It's one of those natural wonders that's just amazing to see. Remind you just how amazing nature is in the world that we live in. So it's definitely worth going from that perspective. you've got access to animals, probably everything you want to see in Africa in that area, whether you're traveling as a tourist, if you go to one of the national parks, or if you go on a volunteer program, you've got a very good chance of seeing the animals you want to see. And if you want to combine it with trips to other places, I can definitely vouch for Botswana. That's an amazing place to go. Zambia, I can't personally, but it's one of the places I'd love to go to. And what I've heard from people who've been there is that it's an amazing place too. But Zimbabwe is amazing. And if you get the chance to volunteer, it's well worth it, because you'll learn a lot more about what's going on conservation-wise, how things work politically in terms of protecting animals in those countries, because there is a kind of coalition of the countries to protect the wildlife as a whole. And in Zimbabwe, in theory, the government own the animals. So if you've listened to me talk about South Africa, the game reserves own the animals. It's just the way things work. But the animals don't know that, so they just kind of wander wherever they want to, as they have for many generations. So a very interesting place to go, and you've got these access to get onto different places. And from there, Chobe River, absolutely recommend it. You've got the Okavango Delta, which is an amazing place to visit as well, both in Botswana. Namibia is one of the places I've been to, and I'll probably talk about in another podcast, but it's just an amazing country, very, very harsh in many ways, but again, one of the places that I'd wanted to go to for a long time and finally got to visit at the end of 2019. Okay, that's it. If you have enjoyed the podcast and there are other places you'd like to know about that you've seen that I've taken photographs in, you're very welcome to drop me an email at graham@ge.photography. So that's GRAHAM @ge.photography. And that'd be a great help. Or if you've got any other feedback, again, you're very welcome to just drop me a line at that email address with any comments or suggestions or anything else you'd like to hear about. And that helps me, because I'd like to make these interesting and useful. And with some feedback, I can do that. So that's it from me. And I will speak to you again in the next podcast. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.